did is we actually created a program that would help you intentionally walk through that process of where am I going, what am I doing, what are my values, what's important, what do I want my life to look like in 5 years, 10 years, 20 years. And as we created the program, we realized that there really isn't one answer because all of our life experiences really shapes who we are and what's important to us.
Welcome to Get Unstuck and On Target, the weekly podcast that offers senior leaders insights and strategies to not only lead with confidence and vision, but also to achieve groundbreaking results. I'm your host, Mike O'Neill. I coach top-level executives on the power of ethical leadership to forge teams to be as united as they are effective. In each episode, join me for insightful conversations with leaders just like you, providing practical advice to help you get unstuck and propel you and your company forward. Let's get started. As an executive coach, I know the value of planning your next chapter. That's why I brought Mary Angela Baker onto the show this week. She's a seasoned leadership consultant who introduced me to the term Act 3, that pivotal stage where leaders have a wealth of wisdom but need a strategy to keep their networks vibrant and opportunities alive. In this episode, we dive into how you can intentionally expand your professional network and step into your Act 3 with purpose. Let's get started. My guest today is Mary Angela Baker. She's a leadership consultant and a lifelong learning advocate who's spent her career helping people build connections and open new opportunities at every stage of life. I've asked Mary Angela to join me because too many leaders step into Act 3 without a plan. That can mean shrinking networks, missed opportunities, and wisdom that never gets shared. She's here to share a better way forward. Welcome, Mary Angela.
Thank you, Mike. I really appreciate being here.
I wanted to invite you on for a variety of reasons, but one is you introduced me to the phrase Act 3 to describe a stage of life. What does that mean to you?
Sure. Act 3 is a phrase that generally people use who are um, Gen X and baby boomers, and it's a time when you're bringing it all together. So it's Act 1 is the beginning of your career. Act 2 is you settle in and maybe think about which direction your career is going. And Act 3 then is the time when you're looking forward to saying, I have this expertise, I have this knowledge, I have my network. What's next? And so Act 3 really is a time when you're thinking about how do I take all my skills and talents and just utilize them for the best possible life?
So, in your opinion, why is paying attention to Act 3 such an important shift for leaders to embrace?
You know the phrase, if you don't know where you're going, that's where you'll end up.
Mm-hmm.
And that actually is so often we're so busy just managing our day to day that we're not thinking about what's coming. And I actually created a program called Act 3, bringing it all together. And it was designed because a friend and colleague came to me and she said, I am the CEO of my company. I am so busy doing my day job that I'm not really anticipating where am I going to be in 5 years. And so what we did is we actually created a program that would help you intentionally walk through that process of where am I going, what am I doing, what are my values, what's important, what do I want my life to look like in 5 years, 10 years, 20 years. And as we created the program, we realized that there really isn't one answer because all of our life experiences really shapes who we are and what's important to us.
Mm. One thing that I enjoyed in our conversation to prepare for this episode is you married two concepts, and that is how important it is to be intentional. You describe Act 3 as things are kind of coming together, but I'll paraphrase. But if we're not careful, we're out there leading. We're providing guidance to the organization. We're doing everything, but we might lose sight of what's next. And the piece that really caught my attention is that when we get so caught up in the today, we could also lose track of who are the people might I need tomorrow. And so when you marry this idea of focusing on Act Three while also be mindful of expanding your professional networks, that
Right.
combinations just struck me as powerful. What is it about the two that you think is so important?
Well, so my background is in leadership development. So I spent a majority of my career at a women's college as the director of the Leadership Institute. So we created professional development programs with our niche being women in the Minneapolis St. Paul metro area. And through that work, you really understand how important it is to build your network. So building it before you need it.
Yeah,
And the with networks, what I find is so interesting is your network is always changing. So
yeah.
when you're 20 years old, you have the network often is your college colleagues, the
Mm,
friends that you had in college, the people you had in class. And then in your 30s, your network starts to change. And I actually created a program for emerging leaders because of that. You're now in a new stage of your life, or in your 30s. You may not have as much contact with your college friends. You're now in a new career, but as you go through your different life stages, your network changes, and in order for you to stay what call a healthy professional network is you need to be actively thinking about who is in my network, who am I meeting, who am I connecting with, and so as you're looking into Act Three, it's the same thing. You might have colleagues that are dear, dear friends that help connect you to people, and then they retire, and so all of a sudden they're not in your inner circle, but they're in your, outer circle and not quite as making those connections that you might need.
When people hear the term network or networking, all too often it gets kind of put in a box. It's what you do when you're trying to generate business or what you do when you're trying to find the next job. That's not how you're defining networking, is it?
No, and I think of networking as who do I know in my circle and how can I help them?
Mm,
So one of the most important things for me when I think about who is in my network is how can I pay it forward? And if you look at it from that point of view of is instead of what's in it for me, but how can I help others, then that makes you a multiplier. And that helps you to again expand your network because when you're helping others, they see that and they in turn will help others and they will help you in the long term.
I suspect we're going to toggle back and forth in this conversation. Let's go back to Act Three for a moment. And that is, I may have oversimplified the concept, but one of my thoughts that popped in my head was intentionality. And that is, don't get mired down in what you're doing, but be intentional to kind of where you would like to go on
Mhm.
that. You're an expert on this. For those who are listening, leaders that are listening, and they say that might describe me. Walk us through the kinds of things that we should be mindful of.
Okay. I'm actually going to use a model that was created by Richard Leider.
Okay.
And Richard Leider worked with AARP, the national office, and created this model or used this model for a program called Life Reimagined.
Hmm.
And Life Reimagined, I was introduced to it through AARP Minnesota when I lived in Minnesota, and then actually was able to meet Richard because he's lives in the metro area. So Life Reimagined has 6 components: reflect, connect, explore, choose, repack, and act.
Hmm.
So these 6 components are the model to use as you intentionally move forward. And what's really great about this model is that it's not you don't go in sequence. It's where you are and what you need. So you can go from reflect to explore to repack to choose and back to reflect and back and forth. But this model is really nice because it's action oriented. So The reflecting, you often think of just sitting in a room and being quiet and reflecting, but it really is doing your homework. The connecting is reaching out to people. So if I'm really interested in moving to your area, I would reach out to you and say, "Hey, let's connect and tell me what you know. What's it like to live there?" Explores that same thing. So you say, "Well, this is what it was like to live here, and here's some organizations you might be involved with." So that's the explore part where I could research that further. Um, Often we have so many options that
Mm,
you need to then choose. And that's
mm,
why I like this model that you bring it down to what do I want to do? What are my first steps? Repack is where I bring in the transformation trilogy. But what am I keeping? What am I letting go of? What am I adding on? And then my favorite part of this whole model, so when as you think about what's next and you've done all your homework and you've talked to people, but the one part that makes it to me the most powerful is the component of acting.
mm,
It's taking that step because so often we talk about that you're unstuck. How to get unstuck. The unstuck is just taking one small step. And so when I used to teach this model, I would say to the people in the class, "You showed up. That is an action." Just by coming here. So the action doesn't have to be "Oh my god, I'm gonna move to Georgia." The action can just be, "I showed up and took this class, and now I'm learning more, and I'm meeting the people that are also in this class, so I'm connecting, and I'm exploring new options."
mm. I jotted these
I
down.
get really
Oh,
I get really excited about this.
well, I can see why, because as I'm listening to you describe it, it makes sense. What really kind of caught my attention is it's not a defined sequence, and people approach that. Of the 6 steps that you just outlined, in your experience, which one do leaders struggle with most?
I don't think there's one easy answer because it all depends where you are.
Okay.
So I and so I would say maybe the hardest one is the acting. And so the act to reflect, the act to connect, that so it's taking that first step. So if you're stuck and you're just trying to do that one first thing to start moving forward. And that's why I do like this is that it's action oriented as I said.
All right. As you were listing those, I wrote them down. And then I wrote them down in red ink, but just so I could remember it, I grabbed my highlighter just as you were talking. Guess
Yeah.
which one I
Which
highlighted?
one did you?
It was ACT.
Yeah.
And not only because you said this is your favorite, but what I like about this is the fact that it takes action. And in large part, when you add that concept, you take an action, and sometimes it's just getting started.
Yeah.
Um, so, Act Three, and what you're offering us is a kind of a way of looking at it in these 6 steps, not necessarily sequential. Of those, you felt that though there's not one that proves the biggest stumbling block, but taking action to reflect, to connect, to explore. You said you
Mhm.
like that. What is it about taking action that resonates with you so?
Because I think in my experience and is that when and I'll just say it personally. So when I am stuck, when I am just not knowing what to do and getting depressed and getting sad and what gets me out of that is to do something.
Mhm,
And so the something and the beauty of how our of our post COVID life is we're now on Zoom. And so doing something doesn't have to be immediately in your area. You can be reaching out across the United States, across the world. So by doing something to expand where you are, I'm involved in the International Leadership Association, and I serve on the community of the women's community in the leadership role, and we have members from all around the world.
mhm,
And so that is me connecting and hearing advice, experience of colleagues in leadership all around the United States. So
mhm,
that small action of acting even though I'm sitting in my home in Maryland, is helping me expand outside of my world.
Now, Mary Angela, you may not know, but this podcast has been downloaded in 60 plus countries. So when it's finished, just know that that could be a vehicle to help get word out about what is it you're.
International Leadership Association.
Oh, very, very cool.
Uh,
I said we may be toggling back and forth, but we were kind of talking about the intentionality of Act
right.
3, and that if you're going to act, um, that would include that connection phase, which I'm kind of likened to networking. What is it about networking that feels so transactional? And if people kind of get that icky feel, how would you encourage us as leaders to go about doing this in a way that builds some depth?
Actually have. There's a wonderful article that is 20 plus years old in the Harvard Business Review, and they talk about the power of networking.
Hmm.
And in this article, they talk about three key points. So I told you I had my notes. Because I wanted to make sure I did it right. But you want to forge better connections through the power of shared activities,
Okay.
forge better connections by diversifying your network, and forge better connections by identifying the multipliers in your network. And so I think as we're thinking about expanding our network, um, again, it's being very intentional, but doing things that you enjoy and you love. So through the power of shared activities, my question to you might be, um, what boards are you serving on? Where are you volunteering? Where are you, how are you getting involved? And so when I moved to Maryland, I had no local connections,
Mhm.
but I'm now active in the local United Way. I served on the executive council of AARP Maryland. I am involved in the International Leadership Association, and I'm involved with my professional association, which is called UPSIA, which is a long acronym for a Continuing Education and Professional Development Association. So making these connections through my associations, through things already established, was a way for me to expand my network here in Maryland.
Mm.
And then through that, the 8 degrees of separation, I met you.
Well, and we have, and I'm trying to remember the first time we had a conversation, but people may not realize between the time that you and I first talk and we even record the episode, it could be weeks or longer. And there's a lag oftentimes between recording the episode and it actually being published. So I'm happy to say that our relationship started weeks, if not months back. But what that has done for me is it's given me a chance to kind of, watch your post, learn more about you in the process. And you have introduced me and now introducing our listeners to some new ideas here. As you step back and you begin reflecting on just the depth and breadth of what we're trying to talk about in a short conversation, what might be the kinds of things do you want to make sure that our listeners truly capture?
Um, a as I think about the, expanding your network, is that it's something that you want to be aware of, and it you don't have to work on it daily, but you should be very conscious that you're working on it, and that you're and when I say working on it, what I mean is being out there, being connected to people, staying in touch with people. Um, there's a lovely philosophy that once a week you should send either a LinkedIn message or a email or a note to someone that you haven't seen for a while,
Mm.
just to stay connected and to be so it is a very active, expanding your network is a very active. I also think it's important to think that there's so many ways to, when you think about, well, how am I going to meet people? So I just listed off some formal things, associations, United Way, um, organizations, nonprofits, but you can also expand your network by um, when you're at a basketball game for your child's, and you're watching your child play a sport. Are you talking to the person next to them and getting to know them and getting to know, who they are? And my favorite example is that my brother-in-law was at his son's basketball game, and a text came in from one of my siblings that said something about Best Buy company, blah, blah, blah about Best Buy. And my brother-in-law responded, well, I'm sitting next to the CEO of Best Buy. I just asked him, and this is what's really going on.
Wow.
So it just happened that, this came in. But that's, when you think about it, who are you meeting? The parents of your children, they're part of your network. And so going, and taking the action, having conversations with the people, asking them what they do, and learning more about them.
As I was thinking about people who may be in Act Three, it seems as if all too often the quote networks that one is in many times revolve around the profession. It might be the industry that you're in. But as good as that might be, it can be constraining because it could very well be you are not getting perspective. And I think what I'm
Mm.
hearing you say is the intentionality to maybe get out of your comfort zone, to reach out. But it could be as simple as a conversation at a basketball game that who who knows? Not only did you make an introduction, but you get a chance to say, "Guess who? Guess who I'm sitting next to?"
Right. We all have stories of friends and colleagues that work for corporations. And I remember Cargill, one of the largest corporations, largest companies in the world, had a downsizing, and they actually eliminated 1,200 positions from in one area.
Mhm.
And so my friends, if their entire network was inside Cargill, all of a sudden they all are gone. And it happened with Target. Target did a massive downsizing. 3M has done a massive downsizing. And so when you think about your network and who you're connecting with, it's important, yes, to have your internal colleagues, your internal circle of influence, but then also be thinking, who is it outside of the company that I can connect with? And that's where when you think about serving on boards, why that becomes important because you're being exposed to people from different organizations, different backgrounds. When you think about even, are you part of the book club from your independent bookstore? And so
Mm.
you're meeting people in your neighborhood. So different ways that you can reach out.
Mm. The nature of this podcast. At some point, I'm going to ask you to share an example where perhaps where you got stuck. And if you would share, and maybe most importantly, what really helped you when you got stuck move forward?
Sure. So, speaking of downsizing, in the department I was in, we had a major downsize, and many of the professional development programs we offer were no longer had the capacity to offer, and we also said this is a good time to think about what else can we do.
Mm.
Took action, which was writing a grant, received funding that we were able to bring in, then build a team that the purpose of the team was to create a new program. And so through this small team, we designed an emerging leadership program
Mm.
that once the program was established, then through the network, so my team introduced me to other people who introduced me to other people. And we actually then were able to create what became the signature program for emerging leaders for women in the Twin Cities area. And not only was it, we had what we called just the general one, but we also then created a leadership program for women of color. We created a leadership program for police officers, women police officers, which was absolutely fascinating because our lead instructor was a retired chief of police.
Mm.
And she then, again, it was the same thing. She brought in her circle and we met people through her. So I think when you talk about getting unstuck, it really is, again, making connections, reaching out, thinking creatively, being curious, um, and keeps going back to that taking action.
Mhm.
Because when we get stuck and you sit, we've all been there, and it's so hard to take that first step.
The example you just gave, I mean, it came out of a significant downsizing, which has so
Mhm.
much emotion tied to that.
Ah,
You were left with this kind of a skeleton team, you and I think and one other, if I remember correctly. And
right.
but what you did is you used this opportunity to reimagine. And
Right.
in reimagining, y'all created kind of a nucleus to build on that applied in multiple ways. As we begin our wrap up here, Mary Angela, what might be some things that you would like to share with us that we've not had a chance to cover?
Um, I think the most important, as I mentioned, I've done a lot of work with AARP, which I find is just one of my favorite go-to places for resources. And all the research that they do is, to me, just feels really, really solid. Um, but when they talk about, as you're looking at Act 3 and as you're moving forward, really the whole thing, obviously we know that we should be being a holistic person. So we think about, you're exercising, taking care of your health, relieving your stress, but what they really push, because isolation is fatal.
Mm.
And that's actually one of the messages that Richard Leider, who wrote the book Life Reimagined, that was one of his key things, is that it's so important to keep stimulating your brain and staying socially connected. And thanks to Zoom, it doesn't have to just be in your neighborhood. You can be really reaching out across the world.
Well, with that in mind, what might be one simple step that our listeners could take this week to start building or expanding their network with purpose?
You know what I'm gonna say, because I am a lifelong learning, so I'm gonna say take a class.
Oh, good.
Take a there your Go to your university continuing education department. If you look at the University of Minnesota continuing education, they have everything from professional development to programs for seniors. So there's a wide variety, but take a class, either take it online and take a class that it's not where you're just by yourself doing a self-paced module, but take a class where you're actually being with people, having conversations, low risk. It's something you're passionate about, just something to be meeting new people. And it goes back to that shared passions when you talk about expanding your network through shared passions.
I think it's a great suggestion. Yeah, Mary Angela, I appreciate you sharing not just ideas, but these ideas are all practical ideas. What's the best way for people to connect with you to learn more about you and the kind of work you do?
I would say LinkedIn. So as you can see, my full name, Mary Angela Baker. And I'm on LinkedIn, and it has, my information there to reach out.
We're going to
Just send me a
include
message.
we'll include your LinkedIn profile on that, and that way, if people want to say, "I'd like to link up with her," that will make it easy for you. You'll just look on the show notes for that. Um, Thank you so much for sharing your expertise.
Thank you. I really appreciate it.
For our listeners, if what Mary Angela shared today resonated with you, I am going to encourage you to connect with her directly. You will find that link in the show notes. And if today's episode kind of got you thinking about your own leadership, maybe the clarity that you bring to your team, the culture that you're shaping, or the challenges that you're carrying as you grow, I'd love to help you think it through. I offer complimentary game plan sessions by invitation only. There's no pressure, just clarity and a practical next step. So if you or someone you know could benefit from a game plan session, you'll find a link in the show notes. I appreciate you all joining, and I hope to everyone listening that you have found ways to help you get unstuck and on target. Thank you for joining us for this episode of Get Unstuck and On Target. I hope you've gained insights to help you lead with confidence and drive your organization forward. Remember, at Bench Builders, we're committed to your success, your leadership excellence, and your strategic growth. If you've enjoyed our conversation today, please leave a review, rate, and subscribe to keep up with our latest episodes. This show really grows when listeners like you share it with others. Who do you know who needs to hear what we talked about today? Until next time, I encourage you to stay focused on the target and continue to break new ground on your leadership path.
This show is powered by Media Leads. To get your next great podcast produced, go to MediaLeadsCo.com.